Angela was so gracious. She invited us out to UCLA, and we asked her out to Watts, and she said yes. So that brings us here. That brings her here tonight. So I was looking to put together a bio, and I was just overwhelmed with all the stuff that you've done. But yeah. Well, Cheryl Ward, one of our WOJ trainees, has a bio. She says she's not gonna cry. She's gonna talk about you for a minute.
Hello, my name is Cheryl Ward. Hi, welcome to WOJ's event. And bienvenidos para las personas que hablan español. Mi español no es muy bueno, pero yo enseñar español en cárcel. Yo en cárcel mucho largo tiempo, y es muy importante para mí hablar contigo, mi hermana. So, bienvenidos. What can you say about Angela Davis? Angela Yvonne Davis. The stats on her are staggering. I printed 22 pages and tried to condense it, and that's just a little bit of what she's done. The statistics, simple statistics on her: Angela Yvonne Davis, occupation, academic, women's rights activist, scholar, civil rights activist. She was born January 26th, and that year went to Brandeis University, Humboldt, University of California, San Diego. She was born in Birmingham, Alabama, and for those of you who it's important, her sign is Aquarius. I said for those of you who it's important, her sign is Aquarius. Okay. She is the subject of a movie that's out called Free Angela and the Other Political Prisoners. And I'd just like to read some of the things about her. She was born in the year she was born, and back then, the climate, it said the climate in the city of Birmingham was extremely hostile towards blacks. While other black families began to move into houses near and around the Davis's residence, the whites around the neighborhood became furious and hostile. Vast measures were used against blacks to keep them out of the area. The most extreme measure was to bomb houses owned by blacks. And Mr. Walter Davis, before we set up, told me that, and I had never heard that ever. And for many years, Angela witnessed in horror as explosions took place around her neighborhood, and eventually people began to call the place she lived Dynamite Hill. She's an activist, a scholar, a writer for advocates, and who advocates for those who are oppressed. And she knew about racial prejudice growing up from her experiences with discrimination growing up in Alabama. And as a teenager, she organized interracial study groups which were broken up by the police. And she knew several of the young African American girls killed in the Birmingham church bombing of 1963. Her father was a businessman and a teacher. Her mother was a teacher. She has a brother, Ben Davis, who was a football player for Cleveland Browns and Detroit Lions. She has another brother named Reginald and a sister named Fania Davis Jordan, who she grew up with. And her life, I said that she probably used to go around the house and go protest signs for anything she saw it was wrong and stuff. But it says that her family made sure that she read as many books as she could, and they went out of their way to get books for her to read, because that's one thing she's heralded as very intelligent, very knowledgeable. She is a philosopher. When she spoke at UCLA, I told my friend, she's like a preacher. She was like, it was almost like she was preaching to us, because her passion for what she has to talk about is so great. And how does one describe her? Everybody knows she's been arrested, and she was hated by Ronald Reagan, Herbert Hoover, President Nixon, who was like, good, you caught her and stuff. So, but she came out of it, and how does one describe her and all she has accomplished? Can you choose one word? No, she can't be contained by verbiage. Imagine, and that's what I said about her as a child, but the fact that she studied from the time she was little and she's so intelligent now is nothing but like she's a thinker, and she fell prey and came up in a time when having your own mind was like something wrong. And it's just that she has these thoughts, and we have these thoughts now, but back then when she grew up, you couldn't say what you felt. And that's all it was. And she just fought for people's rights and things. The Rolling Stones made a song about her called Sweetback Black Angel. Some Italian guy named Virgilio Savana made a song about her and got threatened. John Lennon and Yoko Ono recorded a song about her. A jazz musician named Tom Cochrane recorded a song called Free Angela, Thought and All I've Got to Say. And she has written books, pamphlets, and she has a collection containing essays, writings, and interviews. And the titles of her books: The Meaning of Freedom, Women, Culture, and Politics, Modern Womanhood, Women and Family in England, Princetta, Are Prisons Obsolete, Blues, Legacies, and Black Feminism, Gertrude Moraine, Bessie Smith, and Billie Holiday, Life's Funny Ways, Angela Davis, and Autobiography, If They Come in the Morning, Lectures on Liberation, The Black Family That Ties That Bind. That's a pamphlet she wrote with her sister, Fania. Women, Race, and Class, Evolution, Democracy, Beyond Empire, Prisons, and Torture. Beyond the Frame, Women of Color and Visual Representation. Violence Against Women, An Ongoing Challenge to Racism. The Angela Davis Reader, which is a collection of her writings, her interviews. But she's like so smart.
Yes, she is.
She's so smart, and she's like an icon, and you can't. And she's my heroine. Her brilliance, both as far as intelligence and the application she does, and how her light shines, is best described as a many-faceted diamond, because she has all those points, and it's brilliant about her that shines. And some guy named Garrett Brock Shrapnel hijacked a flight in Flight 2 in 1972, and one of his demands was that they free her.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting. But Susan Burton told me to say the reason I really admire her. I got out of prison last February. 17 years, 6 months, 13 days, and 1 hour from the time I got arrested, August the 8th of 95, till I stepped foot back out the door. She spoke at Dublin, and I was there, I think, for 2 or 3 times until Constance Reese, our warden, stopped her from coming in. But the last thing that she said to us, she had just come back from the tour where she went around the world comparing prisons, and she had told us that Cuba allows the social worker to intervene between the mother and the child. She told us about Colombia, that they have a separate prison for parents, for mothers with children, that they allow the children to live with the mother. And she said that Geronimo Pratt had recently called her and said, "Hey sis, I need to talk." And she said, she talked about that, and she told us, I don't care if you do 5 days, 5 years, 15 years, what you do is when you get out, you have to talk to somebody, and that somebody should be somebody that did time, because nobody's going to understand you. And so that helped me as a foundation to know that, okay, when I get home, I can make it through this, and I'm going home. So when I get home, I have to do something. I'm just not going to sit idly by and watch people keep coming back, things happen to people's children, and just sit by and do nothing. So I come out and I'm pursuing my education to become the counselor that she talks about, so that when they do come from prison, I'll be there for them to talk to, because I've been there and done that. And I do understand. And I thank her so much for that. And without further ado, the diamond, and not in the rough, but the diamond refined. Ladies and gentlemen, Angela Von Dam.
All right, Angela.
Wow. Thank you so much, Cheryl. That was, that has to be the most beautiful introduction that I can remember. Thank you. I'm really happy to be able to spend this time with you this evening. When Susan invited me to do this event, there was no way I could say no, because you do not say no to Susan Burton. And many of you know that, don't you? And today's been a very interesting day. I spoke at the African American Studies Department commencement early this afternoon, which was held at the Fowler Museum on the campus at UCLA. I just came from an event at the African American Museum that was organized by LA CAN, the Community Action Network, where a number of people received awards, Robin Kelly. And here I am at the Civil Rights Museum. So that's very interesting. I've spoken at 3 museums today. And I think that perhaps it's about time for us to bring museums alive. And so Susan asked me to speak for a few minutes. Well, she said, how long did you say? She disappeared. Okay. Maybe I'll speak for about 15 minutes or so, and then we'll have a dialogue. And what I want to emphasize, oh, there you are, Susan. How long did you say I'm supposed to speak? Huh? Oh, 25 minutes? I think it gets longer every time you tell me. First it was 10 minutes, then it was 15, so I swear she said 20 a few minutes ago, and now it's 25. Yes, Chair. Let me see. I haven't quite decided what I'm going to talk about. But what I will tell you was that it was really wonderful speaking to the students who are graduating today. Mostly African American students, but other students who are who have majored in African American studies, and who understand the importance of the Black radical imagination, to understand the importance of the tradition of Black radical struggles. You don't have to be Black to recognize how important it has been for the progressive history of this country to witness and be shaped by the struggles that have been waged by and on behalf of Black people for the last several centuries. And one of the things that I was trying to emphasize in my remarks was that many of them were the first in their families to get university degrees. And that they have to realize that that should not serve as a pretext for conceit and condescension with respect to the members of the communities from whence they came. As a matter of fact, if they learned anything at all during the course of their education, they should have learned how important it is to value knowledge no matter where it is produced. And oftentimes we assume that the only legitimate knowledge is knowledge that gets produced in these institutionalized, professionalized places of learning. I'm talking about colleges and universities. But as a matter of fact, some of the most important insights have come from people who have never had the opportunity to get a formal education. And so I was telling them that they had to learn how to value knowledge that gets produced in venues other than academic venues, other than the university.
That's right.
And knowledge that gets produced in the course of struggle.
Yes.
Hey, that's everywhere. Knowledge that gets produced in the course of struggle. And I want to talk a little bit about that. I think that'll be the theme of my remarks. I want to make sure my timer is working so I know how long I've been speaking. A new way of life is one of those places where important knowledge gets produced about the world. Susan Burton is someone for whom I have the utmost respect because she has made us understand how important it is to look at the particular set of conditions surrounding the imprisonment of women. And I mention this because oftentimes when we talk about the prison crisis, when we talk about mass incarceration, when we talk about the prison industrial complex, we assume that we're talking about men.
Right.
And of course it's important to support men who are perhaps the most immediate and visible targets of that system. But if you ask about the ways in which women suffer as a result of this crisis that has been ongoing at least since the 80s, since the rise of global capitalism, since the proliferation of prisons all over the country. If you ask how women have been affected, first of all, you see that since that period, women constitute the fastest growing sector of the prison population, not only in California, but all over the country, and not only in this country, but in most parts of the world. But if you ask who are the people who are most affected by this crisis, go to any men's prison or visit. So who do you see? Who has to deal with the assaults on families that happen as a result of this drive toward mass incarceration, the emergence of this prison industrial complex, which has been primarily fueled by racism. And of course, if one looks at the particular predicament of women, one begins to understand that that this prison crisis is about a great deal more than prison. It's about, well, someone's saying it's about money, it's about profit. When one looks at the extent to which private prisons have proliferated, and not only private prisons, but the corporatization of public prisons. A lot of companies are making an enormous amount of money. And this is one of the reasons why it has been so difficult, as hard as many of us have struggled over the last 20 years, to stem the tide of the rising population of people in prison. But I'm also thinking about the violence that prisons produce. And I don't know if we make that connection all the time. I don't know if we make the connection between the reproduction of violence within prison walls and what happens to women primarily at home. We have, when we think about racist violence, when we think about repressive violence, we generally assume that the targets are male. But we forget that women constitute all over the world, not just in this country. Women constitute the targets of violence that have been most harmed, most damaged. And we don't ask ourselves, well, is there a connection between what we call domestic violence, between the violence that happens in intimate relationships, and the violence that happens on the street at the hands of the police, the violence that happens in prisons? We don't ask that question. And when we look at the particular predicament of women in prison, we are compelled to ask those questions. We're compelled to begin to understand the interconnections and the linkages across issues. You see what I'm talking about? That we cannot assume that we can simply look at one issue and solve it, because it is linked to a whole web of issues. And violence is a question. It's a set of issues that are so complicated, that are so deeply rooted in our histories. When we, look at the history of racism in this country, it's a history of racist violence. I can tell you that I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, and my very first childhood memories are memories of dynamite being exploded, of bombs going off across the street. And during that period, black people lived in a city in Birmingham which was literally under the reign of terror. Under a reign of terror. And because we've heard so much about terror, and the war against terror, and terrorism, and Islamophobia, and all of that, I think it's really important for us to recognize the extent to which violence is a part of the history of this country. Terror is a part of the history of this country. And so, when we begin to try to solve some of the problems facing us, such as the vast numbers of people behind bars, such as the problems posed by the collateral consequences of imprisonment. You get out of prison, and then there's always the box, right? So you all know about the Ban the Box campaign. All of us are pioneered that Ban the Box campaign several years ago. You recognize that you have to look at the backdrop. You have to understand the backdrop. And the backdrop is very complicated. And oftentimes people assume, well, we're not talking about college-educated people here, so we have to be very simple. And I think oftentimes it's the college-educated people who try to simplify things and assume that what you can do is isolate one thing from another and then analyze that and then think that you really understand the realities of what it is you're examining. And so I think that this is a period when we have to encourage popularization of complicated ways of understanding the world. And I say that remembering my experiences as an organizer right here in Los Angeles. I can tell you stories about black kids, teenagers who had never learned how to read. But then when we started talking about organizing for revolution, they took a book like Lenin's State and Revolution, which is not an easy book to read, and they worked with that text. I remember this one kid who struggled for months, and with a dictionary, it took him 5 days to read one page. But he learned how to read by reading that complicated text. And so don't let anybody tell you that people don't have the capacity to understand complexity. Because this is a very complex world that we live in today. And if we assume that it's simple, and if we assume that problems can be solved simplistically, if we assume that we can solve these vast social problems in the same way that we go and, order, I don't know, go to McDonald's and, because that's like simplistic food that is very damaging and that kills people, right? So we live in a fast food society. We assume that things are, if we're going to have solutions to problems, they have to emerge instantaneously. And if not, in the next couple of hours, at least in the next couple of weeks, or at least within a year. That's about the attention span that we are expected to have in this country. But I want to emphasize the importance of thinking about the long run, thinking about the protracted trajectories, thinking about how the work we do today can indeed help to build a better world. That better world may not be available for us to experience tomorrow, or even the next day. Or some of us may not even be around. Most of us may not be around. None of us may be around. But does that mean that we stop struggling? No. One of the problems in this country is that we have been infected with such individualism. And we can talk about the individualism of neoliberalism, right? Neoliberal capitalism. We have been infected with such individualism that we have difficulty imagining life beyond our own individual existences. And if this had been the case for most of the history of this country, I don't think any of us would be here today. We certainly would be sitting in the Civil Rights Museum here, right? So let's ask ourselves what it means to commit ourselves to struggle for the duration, recognizing that what we achieve may not be experienced immediately. But if you ask yourself, what about Nelson Mandela? And his was a life of struggle. And when he wrote his autobiography, he talked about the fact that the long walk was never over. That no matter how far he walked, no matter how much he assumed that he had achieved, he would always recognize that What he had to do was rest a little bit and stand up and start walking again. And I think this is the nature of freedom. This is the nature of the struggle for freedom. It is an infinite struggle. And I think that a new way of life, just the very concept of a new way of life. I mean, it's a new way of life for women like Cheryl who have spent many years in prison. And if they do not receive the kind of assistance that Susan Burton and A New Way of Life offers to them, they might very well end up in walking through the revolving door. I mean, that is what the system is designed to do. It is designed to guarantee that once you have been in, you will go back again and again and again. And so Susan Burton and A New Way of Life are saying that we will do everything we can to stop that cycle, to guarantee that women can acquire a new vision. And not only can acquire the material means for building a new life, but can imagine life differently. And not only for themselves, but they can imagine life differently for all of us. Because you see, regardless of whether we are in prison, have been in prison, have ever experienced that, our fates are linked together. And it is not simply about helping poor women who happen to have gotten caught up in the criminal justice system. You know, oftentimes those of us who do this work, we end up replicating the very structures that we think we're challenging when we assume that it is us helping, you know, poor people, poor black people, poor people of color, poor women of color. Then we replicate the very hierarchies that have to be crushed, from the very hierarchies from which we have to extricate ourselves. And I think I've probably been talking for, wow, I've been talking for 23 minutes. And I feel like I just got started. But anyway, I want to wind up this part of the presentation, and then we can have a wonderful conversation. So let me thank you, Susan. Let me thank you. Thank you so much. She is so inspiring. All over the state, all over the country. And, you know, you may be, are you going to Australia? Okay, we have to take you to Australia. So anyway, let me thank you for your...
That's your invitation, right?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you a little bit about the organization I work with in Australia that is kind of similar to A New Way of Life. Yeah, so we'll work that out. Absolutely, yes. So anyway, thank you for your attention, and yeah, thank you.
You know, I want to invite the Women Organizing for Justice to ask questions of Angela. And when you ask the question, I'd like for you to actually say the number of years that you spent inside. What we're doing here today is we are raising money to go to the Board of Prison Terms in Sacramento, to travel back and forth to there, to show them what has happened with those that's been released and encourage them to release those old and aging prisoners, the women who have been there for 30, 40, 50 years in wheelchairs, on walkers, and we already know about the medical care there, so that's why we're here today. So, I want to invite you all to ask questions, but I get the first question. So I recognize the violence of the prison industrial complex. I recognize how violently they came into our communities, called it a war on drugs, and literally chained and caged us as if going back into the jungles of Africa and rode it and herded us up and put us into buses instead of ships and incarcerated so many from this community and other communities like it across the nation. So my question is there a real rollback of the war on drugs? Is the tide shifting, and if so, in whose favor?
Well, as we all know, and as you know, Susan, the so-called war on drugs was a pretense.
Yes.
And what's very interesting is that this war on drugs was developed at the same time as the pharmaceutical industry was on the rise.
Yes.
And so if you look at the connection between the licit drugs, legal drugs, and illicit drugs, you begin to understand the extent to which money, the whole, capitalist system is very much a part of this. Now, the question is whether or not things are changing. We heard the Obama administration announce that they want to try to begin to do something about the vastly disproportionate sentences, the racially inspired differentials between, crack cocaine and powder cocaine.
Yeah, and they also talked about my brother's keeper, and I want to know about my sister's helper.
That's right. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. You see, one of the problems that often emerges is that when we are offered the solutions reproduce the problems. And this is an instance in which, when Eric Holder, for example, also talked about the fact that people who are no longer under the control of any criminal justice agency should not be denied the right to vote. And so a lot of people said, great, finally. But if you look at the implication of what he was saying, it is that people who are under the control of the criminal justice agencies should be denied the right to vote.
Exactly.
So we have to be very careful. And many people were excited about the fact that Obama finally decided to say something about about mass incarceration, and then he comes up with my brother's keeper. And I think that's good, but it's not enough. We cannot assume that women are to be completely left out of any plans for any effort to address the impact of the prison industrial complex. And my sense would be that we not only have to deal with the situation of women in prison, and women who have been in prison and who suffer the collateral consequences of imprisonment once they are free, but we also have to look at the extent to which women have been targeted, as I was saying before, by the mass arrest of black men. It's not something, you can't simply say that you're going to address one part of the problem. Because in only addressing one part of the problem, you allow it, the whole problem to continue to reproduce itself. So I say that we have to push the administration. And when I was speaking at UCLA a couple of weeks ago, I was talking about the fact that you have all of these conservatives now who are jumping on the bandwagon. You have like Newt Gingrich and Grover Norquist and Jeb Bush, and they have this organization that's called Right on Crime. Right on Crime. I said maybe they're saying right on. And unfortunately, many people are greeting this as an important development. Okay, finally Newt Gingrich has seen the light. Newt Gingrich will never see the light. Newt Gingrich will never see the light. And when you look at it more closely, you see that what they are interested in is dismantling what is the largest government experiment outside of the military, the largest government project. Therefore, small government. So that means that they would not be willing to call for the reinvestment of resources and funds into the kinds of institutions that we need in order to guarantee that we can eventually abolish the prison industrial complex. So I guess what I would say is an abolitionist approach really helps us to understand who our friends are and who are the ones who are actually, in appearing to support us, are actually going to call for the reproduction of a whole range of social problems based on racism especially, that will lead us right back where we started. Okay.
WJ, what's the
Question.
what's going on? Hello?
My name is Carlita, and I served 32 years in prison. And I remember you talked about Hope's situation, where you said Hope is, louder. I heard Ms. Davis speak it, and you feel like I got so nervous that the next word don't make no sense. Okay, let's get it together here. She spoke about hope and having hope. During that 32 years in prison, my question to you is this. I know political prisoner means this, if I'm understanding it correctly, because we understood it incorrectly in prison, that it was a way that politicians use their political power to keep us in prison. No matter what we did and how we did it, we still could not get out of prison. So I want to know, in terms of, I know what a political prisoner is, does that extend to that, where you say that you're being kept in prison because a politician or because somebody's going into office and don't want to let you out? And for 32 years, and along with so many other women, we worked so hard to get out, not wasting a day of that time, but we still could not get out. So do political prisoners extend to that? Well, congratulations.
really, really good question. And the debates around political prisoners go back many, many years. As a matter of fact, when I was in jail, and before most of you were born probably, not all of you. When I was in jail in 1970, 1971, 1972, we had a lot of debates about political prisoners. And there were those who argued that political prisoners were people who were in prison because of their political beliefs or political affiliations. But that was a very limited definition of political prisoner. And thanks to people like George Jackson and many other prisoners, we began to rethink what that term political prisoner meant. And so we began to see that the institution itself is grounded in political repression. And as you pointed out, many politicians have made their career based on law and order ideology. And therefore they have I guess we think about, what's his name, Willie Horton? And some of you may remember the Willie Horton story during the first Bush election campaign. And so eventually we realized that we have to talk about more than people's individual political affiliations. We have to talk about the extent to which vast numbers of people, women and men behind bars, were targeted by a system of political repression. And as a matter of fact, I can tell you that when I got out of jail, we created an organization that tried to reflect that new understanding. And the name of the organization was the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. And it has that kind of awkward long name because we wanted to make it very clear that it wasn't just about people who had gone to prison because of their political activities. It was about people who had become politicized while they were in prison, and therefore someone like George Jackson, who was not political, so to speak, when he was arrested, but he became politicized and did an enormous amount of work in creating movements behind bars in California. And of course, George had been sentenced to 1 year to life. And many of you probably know his story, but he was convicted as a juvenile, as a youth, under the of having participated in a robbery that yielded $70. And so he was sentenced under the youth authority then, what was called youth, and got a sentence of 1 year to life, which meant that he could have gotten out for a year. But he ended up spending the rest of his life behind bars precisely because of the kinds of conditions that you're describing. And so I think that what is important for us to understand today is the extent to which the system, the entire system, is politically poised against the vast majority of people who are behind bars. We're talking about people of color, we're talking about black people, we're talking about Latinos, we're talking primarily about poor people. There are not very many rich people in prison. And if they do go to prison, they not only get out, but they have it good while they're inside. So absolutely, thank you so much for raising that question. I think we have to continue to talk about that in the 21st century. 21st century political prisoners. Since you asked that question, I would mention some political prisoners like Mumia Abu-Jamal. And I would also mention Assata Shakur, who cannot come home, and who has been targeted. You know Assata Shakur. Everybody knows Assata Shakur? No, not Tupac's mother. But Tupac's mom was also active in the Black Panther Party. But Assata is, she's in exile in Cuba. And just about a year ago, almost exactly a year ago, Homeland Security and the FBI designated her to be one of the 10 most wanted terrorists in the world. Now this is a woman, she's like, Assata's 65. She's been living in Cuba since the 1980s. She's made a life there. And, well, don't let me start talking about Assata, because that whole story is, it's just an incredible story, where she was set up by the cops in the first place and represented as a terrorist in the 70s and 80s. She managed to escape from prison. You don't hear about very many escapes, but she did manage to escape, and she made it to Cuba. And so now the U.S. has basically offered any mercenary the opportunity to capture her and bring her back to the U.S. in exchange for $2 million. There is a $2 million reward on her head. So we have to think about those cases as well.
So, Louise, I know this is your question. Could you ask it? I can't understand it all here. Yeah. But I know my group. I know my folks.
I wanted to ask Angela and everybody here, right? Do you think it's a form of neo-colonialism to call prior sovereign indigenous descent, national minority, USA citizen, Mexican American, Chicano, by any other name that we chose and causes having a Latino theft of identity?
Well, we have to continue these struggles over identity categories. And they're ongoing. I totally understand the question that you're asking. And let me say that earlier today, when I was speaking at the commencement address, I was pointing out that it was great that finally there is a Department of African American Studies at UCLA. It's taken over 40 years to get the Department of Studies. But I was saying, we have to think about the term African American. And I told this story about the first time I traveled out of the country. I was in Europe when I had just finished my first year at college. And in those days there weren't that many black folks from the US, in Paris. So somebody asked me where I was from, and I said I was from America. And so they looked at me and they said, North America or South America? And so I said that was a lesson to me. That, who gives the United States the right to colonize all of the Americas? Why are we America?
Right.
When there are so many countries, America is a hemisphere.
Right.
And when we refer to ourselves as African American, we're also participating in that colonization.
Right.
So, personally, I prefer black. Because black means that we identify with with black people all over the world who, and not only people of African descent, but there are people in South Asia, there are people all over the world who identify, there are people in Australia and New Zealand. And so for me, black is a political identity. Black is about struggle. It's about struggling for freedom. But anyway, we can still celebrate the African American Studies Department.
So we have one more question, and then I want Tiffany.
Actually, I'm really moved by, in a bad way, about how judges, prosecutors, and police accept money and get money under the table to send young adults, black, men of color, women of color. And I'm wondering, what would be the right way on a political issue to contact your congressman or whoever to put a stop or to make them accountable for not only those that have been sent away for rape, certain DNA didn't match, certain prosecutors, judges that are trying to run for office, they want to prove at this time, okay, we're going to lock everybody up to prove I did so much for the community. What can be done to educate people to vote or to get something into action to help hold certain people accountable for things, or people that are in prison for something they didn't do?
Yeah, a lot of people are in prison
Yes.
for something they didn't do. And I totally identify with your passion and your desire to see that whole corrupt system change. Because it happens all over the country. All over the country. And it happened to you.
My mother was involved with a legal situation. I was 12 years old when she purchased houses, luxury cars, what have you. They waited until I was 16 to question me. I don't know if I'm not there to see the inside. They waited until I was 18. They came and locked me up. They got the same name. I did 6 years in federal prison for something I had. To prove that at her age, they had a Xerox copy of her picture. At her age, everything. There's no way.
Well, but you see,
I know how the system works.
and it's also racism. You know, racism is about a kind of exchangeability. Fungibility. It's like you need. I mean, this is what happened during the era of lynching. That if someone claimed that something had happened, then it didn't matter which black person you did it,
Yeah.
or if anybody had done it at all.
Yeah.
Maybe no one did it. But, well, you know, absolutely. But it's not logical. It's not logical. And that's a part of the system. And I think that we have to recognize that that's also related to the fact that there are so many people in prison also who may have done what they were accused of doing, but they still don't deserve to be spending like 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years. And so I think when we talk about innocence, it's really important to talk about innocence. But let's not allow innocence to do the work of consolidating a system that we really have to dismantle in toto. You see what I'm saying? So because we don't want to say that, okay, this person did not do the crime and therefore does not deserve the death penalty. But this person who did should get killed by the state. You see what I'm saying? So we have to be really careful about the ways in which we engage in that work. And I totally identify with you, and I think that have you found a good lawyer?
Actually, I tried
have you tried the National Lawyers Guild? The National Lawyers Guild? Contact the National Lawyers Guild. The National Black Conference of Black Lawyers, that's another organization. See, one of the problems now is that we don't have, the kinds of organizations that used to be available. Everyone knew. And we have to begin to rebuild those infrastructures for our movements now. Because if we're going to do anything that is going to be transformative, bring about change, we have to have an infrastructure that will protect us. And also an infrastructure that can address the kinds of situations such as the one that you've, how long did you say you So you should sue. You should sue. You really need to sue. You need to find someone to help you bring a lawsuit. And speaking of lawsuits, congratulations.
Here he is, Joshua. Come on up.
Congratulations.
Joshua, come on up. Joshua, come on up.
Wow, that was so amazing. Yeah.
That's a part of our infrastructure. Come on up, Joshua. He is so, he's so humble. Can you talk about?
Hi.
Yeah, talk about it a little bit. I'm sorry to put you on the spot. Yeah.
Apologies, I did. So the case was because one of the largest background check companies reported was expunged record, because what they did was, in order to increase profitability of their business, they would buy bulk data from different courthouses and do an instant background check. So you enter somebody's name in the computer, website, and they'll issue a background check right then and there. And people get denied employment, housing because of that. So we formed a class action, nationwide class action of 500,000 people, and sued them, and got the second largest FCRA background check settlements ever.
Wow. And what's the changes you had made?
Well, first, the background check company is no longer selling the instant background check anymore, and now background check companies all across the nation are basically making sure that expunged records are not reported as a result of this lawsuit.
So stay with me, Josh. Stay with me, Josh. So I started down this trail in 1998, and it was primarily me. But I want to ask the staff of A New Way of Life to come up here and join me. And it grew and it grew and it grew. So I want the staff of A New Way of Life to come up and join me. This is what we look like. This is some of us. This is some of us. Where's John? He's here, isn't he?
John was here.
Yeah. Yeah. Come on, Mike. Come on. Yeah, come on. Wow. They're coming out the woodwork. Where's Pamela? Pam back here. Pam. Hi. Yeah. So this is some of us. And it's just such an honor to have a team of folks that are pushing it forward, fighting the good fight, that you can link with, and you can powerfully charge ahead. So stay right there. So I would like the residents of A New Way of Life to come up and join us. So I would like Women Organizing for Justice, the leadership team, to come up and join us. Woo! In a minute, we all gonna be up here. Come on, Pam. Are there all of us and non-members out there? Woo! Woo! All right, come on, Julian.
Thomas
Where's Thomas?
and Anna.
Yeah. All right. So you're not a member, Thomas, huh? That's okay. So
Long Beach, yeah, Long Beach.
Long Beach too, yeah. All of us are not, yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, it started and it's grown and it's grown and it needs to grow some more. There's a lot of work to be done, a lot of myths to be stomped out, a lot of attitudes to be changed, you know, a lot of shift of hearts and minds that has to happen. So it started with one, and I see a whole room full of people here. So I'm going to see and ask, you know, how many of you there will join the fight, join the struggle in some way, shape, form, or fashion. Bring your talents, bring your connection, bring your resources, bring that we can end what's taken over this country. We can end the prison industrial complex. We can end mass incarceration. End racism. Yes, I said end racism.
Right.
We can end it, but it starts, you know, with one, and it grows and it grows, and you are the one, right? I am the one. She is the one. So, you know, this your cue.
That's my cue.
So this is Tiffany.
Yeah.
That's right, Tiffany. Former resident youth organizer.
So I am Tiffany Johnson. I am a former resident of A New Way of Life. So when the residents came, I should have stepped up. I am an employee of A New Way of Life. I am All of Us Are None organizer for All of Us Are None. And I am also part of Women Organizing for Justice. But before I became all of that, I was a felon. I was incarcerated, you know, and I was sentenced to 15 to life. I did 16 years on that 15 to life. So when you told us to come up, Women Organizing for Justice, come up with a question and stuff, and I'm sitting there, and all the questions I came up with, you had already answered them. So I'm sitting there and I'm thinking. But before I ask you this question, I want to come back to you guys. And Ms. Burton says there's a mass need for us as a community to go and fight for our families, our friends, our loved ones, our neighbors. And so All of Us Are None is doing that, but we need you. You know, we're in Long Beach, we're in Los Angeles, we're nationwide. But you guys all made it here tonight. So as you came in the door, some of these cards were given to you guys to fill out for contact information. I urge you to fill them out. If you are not already a member of All of Us Are None, and I see some of our members here, but if you're not, please give us your contact information. Let us contact you. Come to our meetings. We hold them once a month, every second Tuesday in Los Angeles, every second Thursday in Long Beach. We have leadership meetings. We are fighting the good fight. There's so much work to be done, and we need your help. You know, not only on Ban the Box, which is the removal of that terrible question on job applications, but on voter rights too. There's so many different initiatives that are coming up that are going to help formerly incarcerated people. Safe Neighborhood and School Act is coming up in November. We must start working now. You know, and so we need your help to do the help the campaign, to walk the walk, to talk the talk, and go door to door. You know, and so I urge you. So my question to you, besides that little,
come on, let's watch you getting it.
How do we begin to get our communities to organize the formerly incarcerated people? Because the formerly incarcerated people do not realize that they have a strong voice, and if we all band together, we can make a lot of things happen. So he says how to start grabbing our people and joining in to make this big difference in this world.
Now teach us.
I could ask you to teach me. Well,
We
you know,
need a
I
picture.
don't think there are any formulas. We just have to get out there and do the work. And like, you know, Susan was saying, you know, go door to door.
Yes.
Engage people. Think of yourselves as doing this work all the time. And that means that you engage people in conversations. You may have family members who may not be, you know, on the train yet.
Right.
You know, they may, I mean, it's so interesting that oftentimes people who have experienced incarceration are really reluctant to say that we need to abolish imprisonment as the dominant mode of punishment because they think they have seen the baddest people in the world behind bars, right? But that doesn't count the people who are really doing the damage to our lives.
Right.
And so we need to have those kinds of conversations all the time. You know, building a movement takes time. It does not happen overnight.
It reminds me of Gandhi and his long haul and trying to make a
The long haul, absolutely. So just, you know, you all have been doing the work.
Yeah.
So I see, I mean, I can't believe that within a very short period of time, the number of houses has increased from, how many houses were there when I first met you, Susan?
There were two.
There were 2 houses, and now there are 5. Now there are 5. And next year there'll be 10.
Yeah.
And then we'll go on and on.
We need to get them home and keep them home. All right. Thank you. Please give Angela
Thank you.